Good morning. An elegant funeral occurred in Rome Saturday for Pope Francis. In the long history of the Church, Francis will stand out as a weak pope whose open heart compromised his spiritual authority to mankind's most destructive policies, like climate change hysteria and its underlying Malthusian premise of zero population growth and nature worship, open borders, and its underlying premise of cheap or slave labor, and similar destructive social fads of modernity. These weaknesses and the resulting spiritual hunger have given birth to a movement, particularly among young people, to renew the Augustinian tradition in the church, best exemplified by Pope John Paul II and his philosopher, Pope Benedict. So it is with the cycles of history and the church. On the very day that Pope Francis died, Klaus Schwab was being fired from the World Economic Forum. Both events indicative of the revolutionary transformation now taking place in the world as a whole, largely under Donald Trump's leadership, but accompanied by a spiritual reawakening. On the positive side of mankind's ledger in this eternal life, because of President Trump, we are on the verge of a peace in the Russia Ukraine conflict and of reaching an accord with Iran and heading off a further conflict in the troubled Middle East. Marco Rubio and the State Department have also brought peace in the genocidal African conflict between the Congo and Rwanda. But the eternal foes of this republic have also been very busy. On their side, in destructive anarchy and ugly pessimism, rather than the builder's perpetual optimism, which Donald Trump brings to us. Canada will choose on Monday whether the United States harbors a hostile enemy British imperial state on its northern border. In recent days there, the debate has featured the very dark, dystopian future envisioned by the World Economic Forum's Mark Carney for our Canadian neighbor. The British financial empire's imperial forces have also provoked a new and dangerous phase of the historic conflict between India and Pakistan, right in the midst of Vice President Vance's visit to secure America's alliances in that region. Terrorists, probably from the longtime British influenced cauldron of Baluchistan in Pakistan, attacked and killed 26 Indian citizens in Kashmir, heating up that long standing conflict to the point of outright war between India and Pakistan. Amidst a deluge of fake polls and brazen fake media designed to provoke nothing but chaos, murder, hate, and the white noise of cognitive dissonance, Donald Trump is methodically reconstructing the physical U.S. economy, building our future while laying the basis for a new Bretton Woods monetary and trade system. The Democratic Party, along with whole sections of the nation's judiciary, have been transformed in response into a modern version of the French Jacobins, having nothing to offer but engineered chaos and destruction. This week, accordingly, was capped by the arrest of two state judges in New Mexico and Wisconsin for the crime of harboring criminal aliens and obstructing justice, with both judges absolutely and proudly engaged in. I'm Barbara Boyd, and this is your Saturday Wrap. Now, before I go further, I want to alert you to an amazing interview between Susan Kokinda of Promethean Action and Brian Panabaker, the man behind Auto Workers for Trump, a key force in President Trump's November victory in Michigan. Brian provides a full-throated defense of the president's tariff policy from the standpoint of its enormous positive impact on the nation's manufacturing workforce. He lived through the destruction of the automobile industry and understands fully how tariffs can revive both the industries and spirit of the proud state of Michigan. It's a must watch as continuing what he calls the movement for trade union Republicans holds the key in many states to keeping control over Congress in 2026. So, too, you must watch our class tonight, with Will Wirtz exploring the Trump administration's momentum toward a new world monetary and trading system capable of producing widespread economic growth and prosperity and based in the sovereignty of nation states rather than the destructive world government we have just lived through. So let's look at the battlefronts in the current war for the nation. David Ignatius, knowing uniformly in Washington as the paid scribe for the CIA's permanent spy bureaucracy, wrote a piece in the Washington Post on Thursday, largely supportive of Trump's approach to peace in the Ukraine conflict. It's a significant shift in Washington, where Trump is otherwise transforming the corrupted security state bureaucracy, including whole sections of the Republican Party's politicians and donors, although there is still resistance from the party's corrupted elements, particularly in the Senate. Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, met with Vladimir Putin for 4 hours on Friday, and the president himself met with Zelensky in the Basilica ahead of the Pope's funeral. I have to say that I thought it was so symbolic of the Lord's desire for ending this murderous conflict, that meeting face to face in the background of the Basilica. For the first time I know of, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has been interviewed for Sunday's CBS Face the Nation show to explain Russia's positions, something which has been completely blocked for decades here. The outlines of a settlement are clear, just as they were when the special operation started in 2022. Autonomy or Russian control of Ukraine's historically Russian provinces, including the Donbass and Crimea, who also voted to join the Russian Federation. No NATO membership, no dedicated hostile state on Russia's border engaging in hybrid warfare on behalf of NATO against the Russian state. If you remember, the British stepped in when peace had already been negotiated in Turkey in 2022 and demanded that Ukraine fight to the last Ukrainian, which they have done for the most part, making their nation a smoking ruin and sacrificing an entire generation of young people in a British instigated war. Steve Witkoff is also engaged in direct talks with Iran, assisted by the Russians, heading off a potential new war in the Middle East over Iran's nuclear program. For once, and remarkably in the post-war period, there is a recognition that Iran should be allowed to have a robust nuclear energy program to fuel its economy. There is talk about how the U.S. can participate in building out that nuclear capacity without, at the same time, aiding any production of destructive nuclear capacity. Now, about the WEF and Canada. Matt Taibbi and Walter Kern featured on the Racket News Service this week a remarkable piece by the Canadian government's Policy Horizon Service. It's a forecasting service, allegedly to forecast the future. It gives Promethean forecasting a very, very bad and evil spin. It's not what Prometheus was about. It produces scenarios forecasting the future based on what they see as current trends, and is run and shared by one Crystal Vandal Est, who they call a kind of zealot of globalism futurists. She was the head of the WEF Strategic Foresight Department. Now, to put it succinctly, in a document forecasting the future based on present trends, they say that Canada will suffer from a permanent class divide under conditions of economic collapse where only inherited wealth will guarantee security and whole sections of the population will be reduced to communal living and hunting and gathering for economic subsistence. They hail or try to find the positive features in this scenario. Paul Poilievre, the conservative candidate for prime minister, is right to ascribe this scandalous document to his opponent, Mark Carney, who is the current appointed Canadian Prime Minister after the resignation of the World Economic Forum's Pierre Trudeau. Carney is also a central banker and proponent of WEF and British financial empire policies extraordinaire, advocating for a world digital currency, population surveillance and censorship, and a green, communitarian, and feudal deindustrialized human future overseen by central banks. Carney is also presenting himself as the only person in the world capable of taking on Donald Trump in America, which he has volunteered to do militarily if necessary. I highlight this because it brings into sharp focus all the stupid complaints about the economic transformation Trump and his tariff policies are undertaking. It's not just Canada continuing the present trend in the United States, the debt slave, gig, and consumer economy, which the media portrays as, quote, normal. It will result in exactly the horrible landscape painted by the WS no futurists for Canada. You can see this now in our failing educational system, our cultural decadence, and our reliance on other countries for necessities for human survival, life, and national security. The White House is, thankfully, countering the rabid media by publishing details of what they're doing to rebuild the economy by publishing the week's developments on the White House website. I encourage you to spend your time and discipline reading and discussing these accomplishments with your friends rather than listening to the destructive rage machine of the national news media. This week's news included 312 new project permits issued by the Army Corps of Engineers, elimination of Endangered Species Act barriers to new construction, big copper, coal, rare earth mines, and Gulf oil production being opened up with accompanying productive jobs, and most importantly, emergency procedures allowing energy projects, including presumably nuclear projects, to be permitted in 28 days. Executive orders signed this week also dedicated substantial resources to upskilling our labor force in artificial intelligence and skilled trades apprenticeships around the jobs of the future. At the same time, the State Department, the historical font of British intelligence's foothold on the United States, is undergoing a massive reorganization along with the Pentagon. That's what all the heat around Pete Hegseth is all about. Significantly, and I point this out, Tulsi Gabbard revealed this week that under Biden, our intelligence personnel literally had to spend half their time on DEI activities. Do you wonder at the constant failures of intelligence during the Biden years? The trade deals are coming, with more than 100 nations currently negotiating deals. It looks like South Korea and possibly India will be the first to be completed. There are huge relocations of companies and supply chains to the United States, all of it being hysterically covered up or attacked by Wall Street, which sees its influence dwindling as Main Street emerges as the main concern of government policy. Congress will be back in town on Tuesday, and they will see what they do in terms of quelling the judicial insurrection against the president's policies. It's something we will insist on here and mobilize for. I'll see you again on Monday to see what we can anticipate in the coming week. In the meantime, watch the interview with Brian and Susan Kokinda and tune in for the class tonight. You will find yourself optimistic for this troubled world in transformation. And that optimism is the necessary food for the soul by which we will win this fight for the future. Thanks very much for listening. I'll see you again on Monday. Please go to the Promethean Action website, join our community, become a member, comment, discuss. Again, we need you to help us revolutionize this country to get us to a future which we can all love and profit from. Thanks very much.
Thanks for watching. Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.